the night before Tisha B'Av, and somebody asked me, why are we speaking about the Holocaust the night before Tisha B'Av? Why don't we speak about the Holocaust on Yom HaShoah, which I think is in like springtime? So I explained to him that there would have not been a Holocaust had the Beis HaMikdash been in existence. So part of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash was everything that happens from the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash until Mashiach comes, the Spanish Inquisition and the Holocaust. So it's all really one. Tisha B'Av and the Holocaust is all one. It's only because Beis HaMikdash was destroyed and we were in Gullus. This is part of Gullus. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have our two speakers here tonight. The first speaker, Rabbi Amos Bunim, who is part of my family, married my mother, who's here tonight also, Baruch Hashem. And I would not be here tonight if my mother didn't have me, so sort of connected. Not that she ever thought of not having me, but Rabbi Bunim is not only part of the family and a great attribute, an unbelievable man who wrote a book about his father and about the Holocaust, but he's not only part of the Wallerstein family, he is of course part of the American Jewish family, which he helped him and his father more than probably anyone else at the time of the Holocaust. And he's also part of the Naava family. Baruch Hashem, 3 years ago, 3 years and 2 months, Rabbi Bunim spoke at the opening, in this room, at the opening of Naava, and has spoken by every Shabbaton since then. So it is with great honor that I call up Rabbi Bunim to speak. Thank you. This we can open up if you want. Turn it off.
Bring some chair. Here, do you want to just attach this to your laptop? This part, just attach it somehow.
Let's see if it's clear. Here, let me put it on your side. This has to come out very clear. Hold on, I'll do it. See, nobody could do this for me at my share, because they're all girls. Beautiful.
Okay, I'm pressing on start, okay?
What?
I'm starting the recording. Do you want?
Put it in my pocket?
Yes,
just put it in your pocket. Just check that it's on.
Well.
I'd like to... Rabbi Wallerstein Shlita, to the wonderful people who have assembled here tonight, welcome. Rabbi Wallerstein expressed the feelings that tonight is Erev Tisha B'Av. Erev Tisha B'Av represents the greatest tragedies that happen in Klal Yisrael, in the Jewish nation, and it all stems back to the burning of the Beis HaMikdash. But the two Mikdashos that were burnt on Tisha B'Av, and all the tragedies of Klal Yisrael came from that moment, those moments on. And so tonight is a very apropos moment to speak about the Holocaust. The topic that was assigned to me tonight was what was the response of the Jewish community to the Holocaust. And I must tell you that it was a cataclysmic, catastrophic, tragic response by the secular Jewish organizations and establishments. We must learn an important lesson from their total indifference, almost callousness, to life and death.
The secular Jew is a Jew without Torah. And a Jew without Torah does not have the dedication, mesiras nefesh, self-sacrifice for life and death of a fellow Jew. It's with really a very sad heart that I must express what has happened in our time with the rescue of Jews in Europe. The great Torah giant of our age, Rabbi Rabbi Kotler, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, arrived from Vilna to Kobe and from Kobe to San Francisco to New York in Penn Station on April 23rd, 1941. On his arrival, he said, "I came to America for two reasons. Number one, to save the Jews in Europe, and number two, to rebuild Torah in America." He was able to organize all religious organizations under one umbrella, which was called Vad Hatzalah, for the rescue of Jews, particularly at that time in history, of the yeshiva boys and yeshiva people that were left in Europe, and that were the only group that was really trying to save those people was these rabbis under the banner called Vad Hatzalah. And we will see what happened in a later time after they had tried to rescue the yeshiva people, yeshiva Talmidim and Rosh Yeshiva, when they had to go and try to rescue all Jews at a later time. The Rosh Yeshiva felt that it was better to work with the secular Jewish establishment. They had the political clout, power, and financial resources. It is important for us to understand the difference between the Torah hashkafa, the Torah perspective, and the perspective of the secular Jewish establishment, and their approaches to Hatzalah and rescue. The secular Jewish establishment maintained the position that they were governed by law, international law. Therefore, no bribes, no ransom, nothing extra illegal or illegal. The Torah leaders were also governed by law, but by a totally different law, Torah law. And Torah law tells us that pikuach nefesh dochet Torah, saving of the lives of human beings, stands above law. And therefore, under Torah law, any method could be used to save lives: bribes, ransom, and extra legal activities. The Jewish establishment took their marching orders from Washington, and the Torah leaders took their marching orders from Sinai. World history and philosophy impacted on the thinking of the Jewish secular establishment. During the French Revolution, Voltaire, Rousseau, and Hegel espoused the philosophy of so-called Enlightenment, universalism, and humanism. And these philosophies evolved into social justice and social equality. The Jewish communities, socialists, Buddhists, felt they had reached their ultimate goal of social equality. American Jewish, secular Jewish leaders felt that social justice was paramount. Dr. or Rabbi so-called Stephen Wise, the leading Reform rabbi, was the foremost Jewish leader of the Jewish establishment. He was a very close friend and ally of President Roosevelt, and he was deeply imbued with the principle of liberalism espoused by President Roosevelt. 5 factors deterred Stephen Wise from pressuring Washington for rescue efforts. Number 1, he felt it would jeopardize his number 1 goal of liberalism formulated in the New Deal. which was the pinnacle of social justice and equality. Number two, he felt it would cause anti-Semitism. Number three, he would be accused of dual loyalty. Number four, his dislike for the Eastern European Jew. And number five, he saw sending the Jews to Palestine after the war as the only solution. A meeting with President Roosevelt was organized by the Jewish Labor Committee to help rescue Jewish leaders. Harav Avram Kalmanovich, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh Livracha, the Mira Rosh Yeshiva, was invited to represent the rabbis' group. One of the items on the agenda was saving 2,500 rabbis who were Torah scholars. Stephen Wise said to President Roosevelt, and I quote, "What will we do with 2,500 indigent rabbis?" End quote. The secular Jewish organization finally reacted in May 1942, and they called the Biltmore Conference. They refused to put rescue on their agenda. Rather, they were looking to the post-war period and the creation after the war of the Jewish state in Palestine. August 1942, Gerhard Rigner of the World Jewish Congress in Switzerland sent a cable to Stephen Wise which contained incontrovertible evidence of the mass murder of Jews in the concentration camps. Fearing that the Rigner cable would not be disseminated, Yitzchok Sternbuch, a Torah leader who represented the Bad Hatzalah, the rescue organization which was founded by the Rosh Yeshiva and rabbis in Switzerland, sent his own cable September 1942 to the Bad Hatzalah in New York, describing the terrible situation that was going on in Europe. However, Stephen Wise neither shared the Rigner cable with other Jews, nor offered it to the public, but instead gave it to American officials to verify whether it's true. Because of the Sternbuch cable, the rabbis pressured Wise to move and forced him to call a meeting on September 6, 1942, of 34 major American Jewish organizations, which was called the Temporary Committee on Rescue. Wise, under great pressure, agreed to call this meeting, however, on one condition, that the rabbis would not disseminate the Rigner and Sternbuch cables until the State Department confirmed the contents. Late November, the contents were confirmed by the State Department. In the diary of Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr., we find his assessment of the State Department, and I quote, "We knew in Washington from August 1942 on that the Nazis were planning to exterminate all the Jews in Europe. Yet for nearly 18 months after the first reports on the Nazi horror plan, the State Department did practically nothing." At this point, Wise was pressured by the Jewish groups to call a meeting with President Roosevelt. Instead of asking the president for a discussion of relief and rescue efforts, a piece of political showmanship was what he was going to do. And I quote, "A word which may bring solace and hope to millions of Jews who mourn and be an expression of the conscience of the American people." These were his words, instead of asking for the help of the president for rescue. No results came from this meeting. David Wyman, author of the bestseller entitled "Abandonment of the Jews," exploring Wise infatuation with President Roosevelt, writes, and I quote, "And after about 1935, Wise was unable to be critical of or even objective about the president. He was convinced that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was personally anxious to help the persecuted European Jews in the 1930s, that he wanted to do everything possible to rescue Jews during the Holocaust years. And he thought that through quietly supporting these movements, that he would get President Roosevelt to agree. But he did not, and that he fully, though quietly supported the Zionist movement, these assessments were wide of the mark. This is what David Wyman marks, and should have been recognized as much at the time in retrospect, in view of Wise's position as the foremost Jewish leader. His total trust in Roosevelt was not an asset to American or European Jews, end quote. American Jewish organizations convened a conference in January 1943, which was called the Pittsburgh Conference. Although the rabbis' group pleaded to put rescue on the agenda, the only thing on the agenda was Zionist state and European reconstruction after the war. No mention of rescue in the Pittsburgh Conference. Then the Bermuda Conference took place in April 1943, called by the Allies about the Holocaust. Nothing came to this conference. Nothing was approved, and nothing was done at that conference at all. The conference was a total failure as far as rescue was concerned. On August 1943, the Waldorf Conference was called. Rabbi Abba Hillel Silver of Cleveland, Ohio, took over the leadership from Stephen Wise and refused to put rescue and relief on the agenda. He delivered a very eloquent, emotional speech of the creation of the State of Israel and concluded his speech with the singing of Hatikvah and had the audience in a state of euphoria. In the meantime, the slaughter of Jews continued. After the Pittsburgh Conference in January 1943, when the rabbis saw the rescue and relief was not part of the agenda of the Jewish establishment, the rabbis headed by Rabbi Aaron Cutler, the great Torah scholar, the great gadol of our age, they determined that they no longer could depend on the secular Jewish organizations for the rescue of European Jews. They made a major decision to change their focus and to work through their own organization, the Vadat Salah, for the rescue of all Jews. Rabbi Cutler made a clarion and fiery call to all Jews, and I quote, "We must neither abandon hope nor remain silent. Let us picture the thousands of men, women, and children who live in constant fear of a cruel and sudden death. Let us remember those children who, like sheep, are led to the slaughter. Let us keep in mind our saintly brethren offering their lives for the sanctification of God's name. So it is our sacred duty to go to Washington, to make our voice heard and the voice of Israel, and to hear the outcry of European Jewry clamoring for help and rescue. We must remember that at this time the Vadat Salah, a group of Orthodox rabbis and laymen, did not have the power, the political connections, or financial resources, but they felt that they could not stand by idly as the blood of their brethren was being spilled. They tried to get an appointment with President Roosevelt, but they were rebuffed. They realized that they needed a close contact to the president, and they decided to meet with Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau Jr., the only Jew in the cabinet, an assimilated, acculturated German Jew who until this point never wanted to get involved in any rescue efforts, and for that matter never got involved in any Jewish problems. Rabbi Kamenovich, Rabbi Cutler, and my father met with Mr. Morgenthau and explained the gravity of the situation. They pleaded with tears in their eyes and with the deepest emotional feeling begged him to intercede with the president. Morgenthau was deeply moved by their sincerity. In order to arrange a meeting with President Roosevelt, he placed a call to the Secretary of State, Cordell Hull. He was not in his office, and the call was transferred to an Under-Secretary of State, Sumner Welles. He called Sumner Welles to arrange a meeting with the President, and he answered, Sumner Welles answered, "I will speak to the Secretary of State and call you back." He called him back and gave Mr. Hull's answer, and I quote, "Due to the very delicate negotiations that are in process with Germany at this particular time, it would not be advisable to jeopardize those negotiations by introducing extraneous matters." Mr. Morgenthau answered, "Tell Mr. Hull that this is the first time in my service to government that I have ever asked the President for a meeting on a personal matter, one regarding my relationship with my people. If I do not get the meeting as requested, my resignation will be on Mr. Roosevelt's desk in the morning." Sumner Welles called back to say that Mr. Hull had approved the meeting. George Mandel Mantello, Secretary General of El Salvador in Switzerland, issued 244 false El Salvadorian visas to Jews in Vittel, France. The Germans found out about it and wanted to send them all to the concentration camp. Rabbi Cutler, Rabbi Kamenovich, and my father went to Mr. Morgenthau and begged him and pleaded with him to intercede. It was a rather difficult meeting, but they were able to get his ear, and they were able to get him to agree to go to see what he could do with the ambassador of El Salvador. Rabbi Cutler, 1944, heard that the Germans had decided not only to have their concentration camps with the mass murders of Jews, but also to kill all the Jewish prisoners of war, whether they be Americans or English. Rabbi Cutler was very upset, and he went to David Niles, the Jewish advisor to President Roosevelt in the White House. And David Niles, when he heard what the Germans were about to do, was so incensed. He never did anything without asking permission from the President. But he was so upset that he picked up the phone and called General Eisenhower, the general in charge of all the forces in Europe. And he said to General Eisenhower, "Put loudspeakers on all the fronts and let the Germans know that if they do not stop this effort that they're trying to do of killing all the Jewish prisoners of war, there will be tremendous retribution after the war." And General Eisenhower did this, and the Germans desisted from their effort to kill the prisoners of war. And I was in Lakewood on the Yom Kippur that President Eisenhower had his heart attack. Rabbi Cutler decided to make a Misha Berach, to make a blessing for the recovery of General Eisenhower. And he felt and he said, "The reason I am doing it is because we owe tremendous recognition to General Eisenhower, then President Eisenhower, for what he did to save Jewry." Rabbi Cutler, Rabbi Kamenovich, and my father worked for the establishment of the War Refugee Board. The War Refugee Board was able to save hundreds of thousands of Jews. However, there was a gentleman by the name of Peter Berkson, whose original name was Hillel Cook, who was related to Rabbi Cook. He came to America to raise money to solicit a Jewish army. He was a revisionist in the Irgun, but he realized what was happening in Europe, and he took an approach of a very militant approach. He took ads in all the newspapers and articles and produced the most dramatic pageant entitled "Who Shall Live and Who Shall Die?" And he had this in Constitutional Hall in Washington, and he had this pageant in Madison Square Garden. And he invited all the Supreme Court justices, the congressmen, the senators, Ben Hecht, Pierre Van Passen. And then he organized, together with Vad Hatzalah, the Rabbis' March. 3 days before Yom Kippur, 400 rabbis marched up Pennsylvania Avenue. On the steps of the Capitol, they made a memorial prayer for the dead. They made a Kel Mole Rachamim on Lincoln Memorial. And 5 rabbis were to meet with President Roosevelt at the recommendation of his trusted Jewish advisors. Instead of meeting with the rabbis, he went to a nearby army base to welcome a Yugoslavian airman into the army camp. He refused a meeting with the rabbis. And I wish to read to you something that is unbelievable that just came out. For all of these years, the Jewish establishment claimed that what they did was right. They did not have any feeling of remorse for what happened. And now, in an astonishing historical turnaround, Seymour Reich, the president of B'nai B'rith International, the American Zionist movement, and the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations, issued a scathing indictment last month of his predecessors, Reform leader Dr. Stephen Wise and Zionist leader Dr. Nachum Goldman, for doing everything they could to sabotage the rescue efforts of the activist Berkson Group. The Berkson Group was led by Hillel Cook, who used the pseudonym Peter Berkson during his activist campaigns in the United States in the 1940s to publicize the plight of Europe's Jews. The Berkson Group sponsored hundreds of newspaper ads and organized rallies, including a march on Washington. These protests played a key role to bring about the creation of the United States government's War Refugee Board, which helped rescue 200,000 Jews from the Nazis. Reich made his declaration during an address in the 5th National Conference of the David S. Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies, which was held at the Fordham University School in New York City. Numerous congressmen supported Berkson, including Thomas D'Alessandro Jr. of Maryland, the father of the current Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. But some other congressmen buckled under to the pressure from secular Jewish leaders. A letter from Dr. Israel Goldstein, a leader of the Zionist Organization of America, resulted directly in the decision by Congressman Samuel Weiss to drop out of the Berkson Group. Weiss's co-chair at the World Jewish Congress, Nachum Goldman, likewise spent a good deal of his time campaigning against Berkson. The files of Goldman's correspondence from 1944, which are located in the Central Zionist Archives in Jerusalem, are filled with carbon copies of letters that Goldman sent to foreign diplomats in Washington, urging them to stay away from the Berkson Group. At the June 1944 meeting of the American Zionist Emergency Council, Harold Manson, a senior staff member, said that the activities of the press department in the past few weeks have been concentrating on fighting the Berkson Group. In the spring of 1944, Nachman Goldman of the World Jewish Congress met with State Department officials and urged them to deport Berkson or draft him. Goldman told them that his activities could only lead to increased anti-Semitism. On May 19th is when Nachman Goldman was trying to incite the State Department to draft or deport Berkson. Think about it. On Monday, May 18th, Nachman Goldman picks up the newspaper and reads that Hungarian Jews are being shipped to death camps. On Tuesday, he goes on to the State Department and complains about Berkson. And he tells the State Department that Stephen Wise considers Berkson to be as dangerous as Hitler. This is something that is impossible to comprehend, but in truth, this is what happened. We must understand, as Torah Jews, that without Torah, there cannot be a feeling of what is correct and what is right. People think that there can be morality without Torah because there are moral values in the world. But let me tell you that these moral values are meaningless unless it has a foundation of Torah. Because without Torah, there are no values. Without Torah, there are no feelings for a fellow Jew. Without Torah, we cannot think of rescuing somebody on a far distant land. Because a Jew who understands his responsibility to his fellow Jew understands that this must be done because Torah tells us that pikuach nefesh, the life of every Jew, is of the greatest significant importance. And pikuach nefesh no Torah, and life, saving a life, pushes aside even the laws of Torah, because this is what Torah expects of a Jew, to understand that saving a life is of paramount importance. Saving a life is the most meaningful thing that a Jew can do. And today, we are living through another Holocaust. Unfortunately, we are living through a Holocaust here in America. We are living in a beautiful country. We have all the freedoms, thank God. But do we realize that almost 5.5 million Jews in this country never said Shema Yisrael? This, my friends, is a spiritual Holocaust. We are living through a Holocaust in the world, a Jewish Holocaust in the world where there are 15 million Jews, Ken Yirbu, and out of the 15 million, 12 million Jews never said Shema Yisrael. We understand that the spiritual Holocaust can destroy, God forbid, a Jewish nation. We must wake up to our obligation. We must wake up to our responsibility and try to bring these Jews back to Torah. Because without Torah, without an understanding of Torah, these Jews have no commitment to be a Jew. Assimilation, acculturation is at over 50%. And in some communities, unfortunately, it is over 75%. Without Torah, we cannot exist as a Jewish community. We cannot exist as Jews throughout the world. And so it becomes our responsibility to go out in the streets and try to save as many Jews as we could in order to avoid a spiritual Holocaust that we are living through today. And owing to the fact that Tisha B'Av is represented by the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash I would like to take a few moments with you and discuss with you some things about our responsibility to this current feeling that exists today and the problems that we are going through, and why these problems came about for the destruction of the Jewish temple. When Yirmiyahu Hanavi heard, he was the prophet of the day during the time of the destruction of the Jewish temple. Yirmiyahu Hanavi came out and said, as we will read tomorrow night in Eicha, Im yesh machov kemachovi. Is there any pain as great as my pain when he saw the Beis HaMikdash burning? And the commentaries ask, the entire Jewish nation saw the Beis HaMikdash burning. How could Yirmiyahu say, is there any pain as great as my pain? And they give a beautiful answer with a mashal, with a parable. And they said there was a king who built the most palatial palace. And the ministers and ambassadors and kings from all over the world came to see this palace. And it was the most magnificent architecture, the most magnificent art and sculpture that could exist. And one day, a fire came and burnt this castle, this magnificent castle. And the king came out from the ruins of the castle, and he said, there is no pain like my pain today. And all the people asked him, but Mr. King, we are all pained by the destruction of this castle. It was so magnificent. It was the greatest thing that we ever saw. We're all pained. How could you say that there's no pain like your pain? And he told the people, my dear people, you see the outer structure of this palace, and many of you have seen the inner structure of this palace. But nobody saw that room, that subterranean room that I had in the basement of my palace, where I had all my great treasures. The greatest treasures of the world I had in that subterranean room. And therefore there is no pain as great as my pain. And Yirmiyahu the prophet said, there is no pain as great as my pain. I had all these treasures of history of Klal Yisrael from generation to generation, starting with Abraham all the way till now, in the subterranean part of the palace of the Beis HaMikdash. And all these treasures are ruined. And therefore there's no pain as great as my pain. And when Yirmiyahu the prophet was told by the Almighty, the temple is burning, go find Moses and tell him he knows how to cry, you don't know how to cry. And Yirmiyahu says to the Almighty, but I don't know where to find Moses. And the Almighty says, go find Abraham. Go find Isaac. Go find Jacob. And Yirmiyahu comes to Abraham and says, Abraham, when Abraham asks Yirmiyahu, why are you awakening me? What happened? Why are you coming today? And he says to Abraham, don't you know the temple is burning? And Abraham says, but why is the temple burning? And he is told that the Torah came to say what the Jews were doing at that time caused the destruction of the temple. And Abraham says, Bring me the Torah. And Abraham says to the Torah, you are coming to talk against Klal Yisrael, the nation of the world, the Jews. You are coming when you know that the only nation in the world that accepted your Torah was the Jewish nation. It was offered to all the nations of the world. And you are coming to testify against the Jewish nation? And the Torah was very embarrassed and moved to the side. Then Isaac came and said, Ribono Shel Olam, help us. I gave my life. I was ready to sacrifice my life on the altar. Akedas Yitzchak. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not answer him. And then Yaakov came and said, I lived with Lavan for 20 years, who tried to destroy me. And then I was attacked by Esav. And that, please help us in that source and that merit. And he was not answered. And then came Moses. Moshe says, I took Klal Yisrael through the desert for 40 years with all the trials and tribulations. Please help us. And he was not answered. And then came Rachel. The mother of Klal Yisrael comes and says, you know, Almighty, you know that my sister was going to take my husband away. And I should have been jealous because that belonged to me. Jacob belonged to me. And my sister is usurping me because my father created a whole difficult situation. But what did I do, Almighty? I did not take revenge. What did I do? I gave all my signals to my sister that her husband should feel that it's me. And not only that, I went under the bed when they were together so that Jacob should hear my voice and not embarrass my sister. Ribono Shel Olam, she said, I was not jealous. Please, in the honor and the schus and the merit of my not being jealous, do not be jealous, do not take revenge of Klal Yisrael. And Rachel was answered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The nation of Israel will find salvation. The nation of Israel will find the days that will become the days of the greatest days of Klal Yisrael. Because of you, Rachel, because of your schus, because of your merit, I am going to save Klal Yisrael in the time to come. Abraham could not be answered. Isaac could not be answered. Jacob could not be answered. Moses could not be answered. But Rachel Mevakel Boneha, Rachel was answered, and Rachel was the savior of all of Klal Yisrael. And so to you young ladies who are here today, remember that you are the Rachels of today. You represent the saviors of Klal Yisrael. And I tell you, may you all have a bracha to be part of the savior of Klal Yisrael. That Klal Yisrael should see the greatest schus, the greatest merit, and see in the very, very near future the days of Mashiach. B'mheira b'yameinu. Amen.
Yes.
We're going to have a 5-minute break and then